am very grateful for the opportunity to have been involved in and have been part of this project. Thank you very much. Hopefully, we have managed to prepare such a comparative law work that hasn't been published ever before, and that can also be a starting point for future studies in this field. I hope that those researchers who are interested in the subject everywhere in Europe will find it useful to consult this work. Before starting my presentation, I would once again thank the participating professors for their valuable contributions and for their constructive and fruitful cooperation. Now, starting to my presentation, today's issue, I am going to give an overview of the different approaches of the concept of sovereignty. I will argue, as a conclusion in advance, that this notion is not obsolete, not out of date, and can be used both a practical and a scientific point of view, even in the 21st century. As for the ideological historical aspects, the concept of sovereignty has been invented in the 16th century. The concept is traditionally linked to Jean Bodin, who first used the term to describe modern statehood in his work Six Books of the Commonwealth, written in 1576. The concept itself was originally conceived to describe absolute monarchy, but was later used to describe the rule of other sovereigns as well. Thus, it was created as one of the most prolific concepts in political theory. In my presentation, I am going to attempt to introduce the types of sovereignty, mainly on the basis who the sovereign or who can the sovereign be. Although sovereignty although sovereignty was an object of intense interest to political philosophers, mainly until the middle of the 20th century, it is not still an out-of-date concept. While it is true that modern international law, recent political practice, and the chiseled concepts of law and state have diminished the importance of the concept until now, it hasn't disappeared. In fact, recent international trends and modern constitutional practice haven't been able to do without the paradigm of the state sovereignty. Just think, for example, of the Zoltán decisions from the German Bundesverfassungsgericht. Like all concepts, it has been inflated. For example, many people now talk about sovereign decisions, sovereign rights, and so on, but its political, theoretical content remained almost the same. The first question is what this notion means. In general, we can say that, according to Jelinek's view, sovereignty is a supreme authority over a specific territory and a permanent population. Thus, the concept of sovereignty has three components. Supreme authority indicates the fact that the holder of power exercises such power exclusively, and it doesn't have to share it with anyone else. The sovereign is an individual or body or a group of individuals that holds all state powers and to whom everyone who are subject to his power is obliged to obey. This definition is sometimes supplemented by the requirement that not only everybody is obliged to obey, but as a tendency, people actually obey, like in the theory of John Austin. Just an interesting thing, this is the Ernst Thälmann Island in the Caribbean. This island was gifted by Cuba to the German Democratic Republic, Deutsche Demokratische Republik in German, in the 70s. And when the reunification treaty has been concluded, this territory was missing from this unification treaty. And what about this 15-kilometer long island? some say that it even now does belong to the German Democratic Republic. However, as we can see in the presentation, without supreme authority, so without being a state, it cannot. So according to the international community, it does belong now to Cuba again, and it's not a res nullius and not the part of the DDR. As for the territory, it's plain to see that territory is a sine qua non of the concept. The effect of the commons must always be realized in a physical space. Without that, no state or state sovereignty can exist. This is the insignia of the Order of Malta. The Order of Malta is a party of international organizations. It can be a subject to a part to international law, but it has no territory, so not being a state, cannot possess sovereignty. And of course, the population is also an indispensable element of the concept of sovereignty. If there are no psychophysical entities with a will to whom the regulations of the supreme power may apply, then there can be neither supreme power nor any power at all. The existence of supreme authority results in territorial sovereignty over the territory covered by its authority and personal sovereignty over individuals subject to its power. On that basis, the sovereign is entitled to the normative and individual assessment of all actions that have occurred in the given territory or made by the citizens everywhere in the world. Sovereignty has two aspects or two sides, an internal and an external one. The aforesaid classic perception of sovereignty belongs to its internal side, according to which sovereign has exclusive, complete and supreme power over a given territory and the population living there, which is not limited or can be limited by any other power. The external side of sovereignty is the independence and immunity of the sovereign. This encompasses the option for the state to participate in international relations as an equal party. For example, with equal rights to declare war, make peace, accede to international organizations, enter into international treaties, and so on. And it also encompasses the possibility of being exempt from jurisdictions of other sovereigns. Here you can see pictures of the so-called micronations, territories of micronations. These are not microstates because the international recognition is not guaranteed to these states. In order, this is Sealand, Rose Island, and Liberland. Liberland is an island between Serbia and Croatia. And there is a dispute that to which country does it belong, and the Czech man proclaimed the occupation of this island and said that this is Liberland or country because it was a terra nullius. So according to the international community, it was not terra nullius. We don't know to which country it belongs, but it's either Serbia or Croatia, we don't know, but one of them possesses in the future this island, so it's not a terra nullius, and without the international community's recognition, it cannot be a state, so cannot possess this Czech man and the other several dozen people cannot possess sovereignty. Beside the external and internal side, another major theoretical issue is the nature of the concept of sovereignty. Based on the different perceptions of that nature, we can speak of legal and political sovereignty. The approach of legal sovereignty is based on the idea that sovereignty is a legal concept. The scope of the exercise of supreme power is limited by the framework of the positive law. Based on this approach, it wouldn't be true that the sovereign might do whatever it sees fit, as it is bound, at least, the positive law, the laws created by itself. Therefore, the legal approach of sovereignty determines the requirement of a state bound by law, that is the formal rule of law, the requirement of the Rechtsstaat, perceiving the concept of sovereignty as a normative concept. Political sovereignty, on the other hand, considers sovereignty a factual issue. According to this approach, the concept of sovereignty as a descriptive concept indicates the existence of power, regardless of whether the exercise of power is ethical, fair, complies with certain legal principles, and so on. The types of sovereignty can be distinguished based on the different subjects of sovereignty. This is the main issue of my presentation, that is based on who the sovereign is. According to that, the following types of sovereignty can exist: sovereignty of monarchs or rulers, parliamentary sovereignty, popular sovereignty, state sovereignty, and national sovereignty. Here should be mentioned that there are theories which don't define the specific subjects of sovereignty. For example, Carl Schmitt, here you can see, defined the sovereign as an entity who, I quote, decides on the state of exception. It cannot be generally defined who decides on the state of exception in a specific political and legal system, but whoever has the power to make this decision, it qualifies as the sovereign. Accordingly, the sovereign is inside and outside the law at the same time, as the sovereign is the entity that can determine both the law and its boundaries. So, the groundwork for the doctrine of the sovereignty of monarchs was laid down by Jean Bodin. According to Bodin, sovereignty is the most high, absolute, and perpetual power over the citizens and subjects in a state, in its contemporary term, commonwealth. The characteristics of the sovereignty, according to also Bodin, are legislative power, the right of declaration of war and peace, the appointment of senior officials, the Supreme Judicial Forum, the power to give pardon, receiving homage, issuing money, determination of weights and measures, and levying taxes. Bodin considered that sovereignty was vested in the absolute monarch, who gained their power directly from God, to be its vicar and representative of its will. Therefore, no man can stand above it. The enforcement of its will cannot depend on others, as you can see, otherwise it wouldn't be sovereign. In order for the rulers to be able to fulfill their mission and perform the task entrusted by God, they must gain almost limitless power. According to Bodin, the sovereign is not even bound by their own laws. It is limited only by three things: divine law, natural law, and the international agreements entered into by the sovereign itself. Another famous protagonist of the sovereignty was Thomas Hobbes, proponent of the absolute monarchy too. According to Hobbes, due to fear of violent death, people moved on from the natural state, that is a condition of war of every man against every man, bellum omnium contra omnis, which was incapable to warrant their safety, to the political or civil state. Thus, they created the state, commonwealth, and created the sovereign itself by waiving their rights, except the right to life and physical integrity. They concluded a social contract with each other to entitle the sovereign to make any normative or individual decision that it sees fit for maintaining the social order. The sovereign is not a party to, but simply the result of the social contract. That is, the sovereign didn't enter that contract, so by definition, it cannot violate it. in Hobbes' theory, sovereignty is absolute and unrestricted. The principle and the practice of parliamentary sovereignty are the products of the development of English state and law. As in the case of the sovereignty of monarchs, the practice developed first and the theoretical justification was established subsequently, or at most in parallel. In England, the parliamentary sovereignty came into being as a result of the civil wars of the 17th century and became firmly established in the 18th century. Today's so-called parliamentary monarchy was historically preceded by a transition period, the era of constitutional monarchy, where the monarch exercised the same or nearly the same power, nearly the same rights as the parliament. That was the so-called age of king in parliament, or neutrally crown in parliament with a Lockean term. This era constituted a transition from sovereignty of monarchs to parliamentary sovereignty. In the 19th century, when Albert van Dicey wrote that the pillars of the English constitutional law, these are the principle of parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law, which can constrain the parliament's sovereignty. So parliamentary sovereignty, just like the sovereignty of monarchs, denies the division of power. According to this theory, state power is vested solely in the parliament, and any state body can participate in the exercise of power with the authorization of the parliament. The first realization of this concept shows perfectly this feature, as you can see in this slide in detail, what the courts can do, what the government can do in a system of parliamentary sovereignty. Parliamentary sovereignty is subjected to the principle of representation. This means that the parliament is not for itself, but for those who elected its members. As voters cannot decide all matters themselves, they delegate representatives in their stead who make the political decisions. It also follows that the quality of parliamentarism basically depends on who can elect the representatives. If all citizens are entitled to do so, then parliamentary sovereignty is a type of popular sovereignty that implements indirect exercise of power. However, since the idea of parliamentarism haven't meant the realization of universal suffrage for a long time, we should draw distinction between parliamentary sovereignty and popular sovereignty and consider these independent types. Popular sovereignty is the invention of the French Enlightenment. Its theoretical foundation is traditionally linked to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. As mentioned before, parliamentary sovereignty, that is indirect exercise of power by the people, can be perceived as a part of the popular sovereignty in a broader sense, while popular sovereignty in a narrower sense means that the people exercise their power directly without the interposition of representatives. Both concepts of popular sovereignty are used in today's scientific literature, and often written constitutions don't differentiate between these forms either. According to Rousseau, there are only two requirements as regards the manner in which laws are established: that they should be made by and applied to the people as a whole. That is, the disposing will and the subject of the disposition must be the same. The will must be directed to itself. This also means that everybody is involved in the life of the state in two positions. On the one hand, as a person in whom the general will is vested, that is a part of the supreme power, and on the other hand, as a person who is the subject of and obliged by the laws. The fact that laws must be made by the people as a whole means that positive law must be the declaration of the general will, the volonté générale, but it doesn't mean that unanimity is required for the validity of laws. Only two requirements are set. First, that everyone who has concluded the social contract and thus is considered to be part of the state, should have the right, at least indirectly, to vote on the law, and the majority of the law should be cast in favor of it. Besides it, no individual person may be given rights or burdened by obligations. It is only possible in a normative way. The concept of state sovereignty is employed to emphasize that the subject of sovereignty is not an organ or a part or a component of the state itself, but the state, an impersonal institutional system as a whole. In this way, the concept of state sovereignty can be distinguished from popular sovereignty, according to this letter, not the state, but one of its components, the entirety of the citizens are the sovereign, and it can be distinguished from the sovereignty of monarchs and parliamentary sovereignty too, where the absolute monarch or the parliament is the subject of sovereignty. In this sense, the state sovereignty is closely linked to the division of power. Ultimately, it expresses the expectation that no organ, part, or component of the state can be the exclusive sovereign in itself. The sovereign can only be the state in its entirety as a collective entity. In the end, the concept of national sovereignty is linked to the concept of nation. As we can use the term nation in two senses, national sovereignty has also two types of definition. We can distinguish the notions of political nation and cultural nation. Political nation is the people itself, that is, the totality of the people of the same citizenship living in the same state. Cultural nation, however, is a group of people with the same ethnicity, cultural tradition, custom, language, and history. Therefore, national sovereignty also has two meanings. In the 18th century, the concept of political nation, when the concept of political nation developed, national sovereignty was basically used as a synonym of popular sovereignty. From the 19th century, when the concept of cultural nation emerged, national sovereignty was used more and more often to express cultural identity. In the formal sense, it expresses a fact, namely that the actual subject of sovereignty is the totality of citizens as a political community. In the latter sense, it formulated a political goal to be achieved, the goal that people with the same identity should live in and be the citizens of the same state, the so-called nation state. In this latter sense, the national nature of sovereignty is an orthogonal dimension which can connect to any other types of sovereignty. In this sense, we can talk about national parliamentary sovereignty, national state sovereignty, and so on. Today, both meanings of the national sovereignty are used, so it can be a synonym of popular sovereignty as well as the desire for political unification of the members of a cultural nation. Since sovereignty is rather a fact than a formal legal requirement against the operation and structure of modern states, otherwise we couldn't explain the statehood, for example, North Korea, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and so on. This notion is usable for describing the functioning states even today. The aim of this presentation was to classify the forms of sovereignty on the basis of the subjects thereof and argue that this political theoretical notion is not obsolete even today, as neither the concept of station is. I hope this attempt was successful. Thank you for your attention.